Muito bem, bom dia a todos. Eu vou depois fazer em inglês a introdução ao nosso convidado especial. Para aqueles que estão assistindo também pelo YouTube, bem-vindos ao nosso evento. É um evento da Faculdade de Direito, Departamento de Filosofia e Teoria Geral do Direito, e especialmente do Grupo de Análise Regulação, Moeda e Risco, que se dedica aos temas da moeda, Banco Central e o sistema financeiro em geral de uma perspectiva interdisciplinar, não como direito bancário, regulação bancária, mas de uma perspectiva mais ampla, política, filosófica. Por isso que vem a calhar aqui a palestra do professor Rattler. I will switch to English. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Jean-Paul Veiga da Rocha, professor at the USP Law School. Welcome to another event organized by GARMR, the Group of Analysis on Regulation, Currency, and Risk at our law school. Our research group is based in the Department of Philosophy and General Theory of Law and has as its goal to develop an interdisciplinary and pluralistic reflection on money, central banks, financial regulation, and the broader agenda of this thematic field. Today, we are privileged to welcome Professor Bradley Rattler from the University of Wyoming, US, and director of that university's Bitcoin Research Institute. Together with Andrew Bailey and Craig Wormk, Professor Rattler published the book Resistance Money, a philosophical case for Bitcoin last year. And it was published by the prestigious publisher Routledge. It is a quite impressive and extraordinary book, and a must-read for anyone who wants to deeply understand the challenges, criticisms, and opportunities brought about by the advent of cryptocurrency. Professor Rattler will give us a lecture lasting around 40 to 50 minutes, as he prefers, after which we will have the opportunity for a Q&A session, including participation from those following us on YouTube. Our undergraduate students from the current course on Law, Money, and Society are also here. With the students, we had the opportunity to discuss a chapter from Professor Rattler's book in the very beginning of the term, this semester. Also at the table with us is Dr. Guilherme Bandeira, who defended his doctoral thesis in our department and earned his LLM at New York University and has 2 degrees, philosophy from USP and law from FGV of São Paulo. Just a personal note, more than 20 years ago, I was part of the team, a junior member of the team who launched the project of FGV Law School 4 years before we had the first class. So it's a great pleasure to see that the alumni of FGV
I'm the third.
is the third, and that's great. That's the good news. The bad news is that I'm getting very old. Yeah. And Guilherme has kindly um, co-organized this event and bringing Professor Rattler. So I'd like to thank you very much for this. So thank you for coming, and thank you for you guys on YouTube. So Professor Rattler, the stage is yours. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. And for those who are tuning in on YouTube, I appreciate it. I want to talk a little bit about some of the themes from the book and then hear the questions that you all have. So I could have titled the talk something like How to Think About Bitcoin or How to Evaluate Bitcoin, but I think it's more interesting to be provocative. So the talk is Bitcoin is good. That is the thesis, and I'll try to give some arguments for that as we go. I would note that back in 2017, two professors of computer science writing about Bitcoin noted that academics essentially ignored Bitcoin for several years after it was introduced. Many academic communities informally argued, so not in journals, but just privately with each other, that Bitcoin couldn't possibly work based on theoretical models or experiences with past systems, despite the fact that it was working in practice. So academia is way behind on Bitcoin. Far more people use Bitcoin around the world than there are academics who are working on it. I'm subscribed to the Google Scholar alerts for when new Bitcoin papers are published, and 95% of them are some sort of financial modeling of where Bitcoin's price is going. And to me, as a philosopher, that is one of the least interesting things about Bitcoin. So I will talk very little about the price of Bitcoin, except where it relates to things that I am interested in, like monetary policy. So the guiding question for me is how to evaluate Bitcoin. Along what dimensions should we think about Bitcoin? And I think the best way to answer that question is to use a thought experiment from John Rawls and John Harsanyi, a philosopher and an economist, called the veil of ignorance. The veil of ignorance has a few different forms, but the form that I like is forget who you are, but remember everything about the world. So keep in mind everything that's true about the world except which person you are in the world. And then ask, how would I feel about Bitcoin? If I could be anyone in the world, if I had an equal chance of being any one of the 8 billion people there are, how would I feel about Bitcoin? I think that helps us to get past biases that we have. Some people have a lot of Bitcoin and have done very well. Some people knew about Bitcoin 10 years ago and didn't get any, and now they're angry about it. We could be either of those people in this thought experiment. And so it helps us remove our own personal biases and situations from the equation. So I'll give just a brief background about Bitcoin. I don't know how many people in the room or on YouTube or Zoom are familiar with the origins of Bitcoin, but I want just a very brief history of Bitcoin the way I like to tell it, and then on to some dimensions of Bitcoin for evaluation. So this is a picture of Judith Milhone, sometimes called Saint Jude. She was a computer programmer and hacker and early cypherpunk. In fact, coined the term cypherpunk to refer to a group of people who are trying to create privacy on the internet. The cypherpunks thought that the internet had a huge potential for promoting democracy, for promoting inclusion. She famously said, girls need modems, because from behind a modem, you don't know if somebody is male or female, gay or straight, black or white. You don't know anything about them except what their ideas are. And she thought it was very important. At the same time, cypherpunks were very worried about the internet's potential for violations of privacy. They knew that the more things moved online, the greater the potential there was for people to be spied on in their activities. And so they were a group dedicated to bringing about the best of the internet and trying to guard against the worst. And they did it by writing code, by writing pieces of software. Cypherpunks are responsible for PGP, pretty good privacy, for Tor and BitTorrent, a number of other protocols that allow people to hide who they are in their online activity. And the holy grail for the cypherpunks was digital cash. How can we bring money online, but in a way that preserves a lot of the privacies that physical cash offers? There are plenty of digital money going around at this time. Banks are moving online. But money that you spend through your bank account online is not like cash. There are a number of freedoms that cash brings about that digital money does not. So the cypherpunks were working on trying to do digital cash. And the best way to do it, most of them tried, was have a bunch of gold, put it in a safe or a vault, and issue certificates that people could trade around, and they would keep track of who was moving the certificate. So there was a centralized database of who owned which certificates, and then there was a centralized store of gold, usually in the US, usually in a strip mall somewhere with a little storefront. And one by one, their physical locations were found, and they were shut down by the FBI and taken to jail, charged with being unlicensed money transmitters. So then there was this additional goal of the cypherpunks. How can we do digital cash without being sent to jail? And that means not having a centralized person who's in charge, who's keeping track of things, keeping a database, and not having anything that looks like money. So no US dollars, no gold, etc., in your own possession. The big problem with this is if you don't have a centralized ledger, then how do you prevent people from double spending? So it's pretty easy to prevent people from counterfeiting using digital cash, but it's very difficult to prevent people from spending legitimate digital cash twice or 3 times or 100 times. This is the classic problem with anything digital, is that copying it and pasting it results in no loss of really anything relevant to the monetary properties. So if you try to photocopy physical cash, you lose something. You lose the composition of the bill itself. The coloring is usually a little bit off. When you do this digitally, there's no notable or noticeable differences. So if I send you a picture of a $5 bill, you can copy that picture and then send it around as many times as you want. And obviously, this would be very bad for something that is trying to function as money. So the big goal of the cypherpunks is, how do we do digital cash that retains most of the privacy features of cash, but also solves this double spending problem? And the first solution that has actually seemed to work is Bitcoin. Now we're only 15 to 16 years into this experiment, so who knows where it will go from here. But at least for now, Bitcoin seems to be working as digital cash without a centralized keeper of the data and without any physical thing backing the value of it. There's no gold held anywhere that represents or is represented by Bitcoin. Traditional money has people playing 3 distinct roles in the monetary system. So there are the makers of the money, there are the managers of the money, and there are the mediators. So for makers, we're thinking of central banks. For managers, we're thinking of commercial banks, people who you give your money to hold on to it, to take custody of it for you. They will take your physical cash in exchange for numbers on a screen, maybe on an app that tells you how much of your money they're holding for you. And then mediators are people who help you transact with that money. So PayPal, Visa, MasterCard, American Express, etc. People play all 3 of these roles in the traditional system. Physical cash has makers. I looked up a little bit about how Brazil works in this, but I'm not sure whether the central bank creates the physical cash as well. So they do. Okay. So in the US, we have the Federal Reserve, which makes money, and then the US Treasury, which actually prints the bills that the Federal Reserve tells them to make. And they're two distinct entities. A lot of countries have just one entity that does both of these things. But then there's no managers. You can hold on to the physical cash yourself if you want to. And there's no mediators. If I want to give Guilherme $10, I don't have to ask someone else to help. I can just hand it directly to him. Digital dollars, the money that's in your bank accounts, have all three of these. So they're originally created by the central bank. Then they're held on. You can't hold digital dollars yourself. There's some intermediary holding on to the money for you and then telling you how much they have. And then you also can't transact with it directly. Some third party has to be involved. Bitcoin is like physical cash in that you can manage it yourself. You can hold your own private keys. You don't need anyone else's participation in order to transact with it. You can do that directly peer-to-peer. But it's different from physical dollars in that there's no centralized maker either. The people who make Bitcoin are a rotating cast of miners who are following an algorithm to solve math problems. And what decides how much Bitcoin there will be at what time is the algorithm, not the people. Nobody can decide to make more or less Bitcoin than the algorithm tells them to make. So Bitcoin is very different from both of the kinds of money that we're used to, physical and digital. So that's just a bit of how Bitcoin works and the background, but as a philosopher who does ethics, I'm most interested in the question is this a good thing? It exists, it's working, but is that good for society, for people as a whole? So go back to this veil of ignorance thought experiment. We can ask if it's good for me, if it's good for you, if it's good for the people in this room. But I'm more interested in the broad question, is this a good thing for the world? And there, I think the veil of ignorance helps us ask that question. It removes our own political biases. The political situations in countries are constantly changing. Our own political situation is changing. The US, at least, went from a Republican administration to a Democrat administration, back to a Republican administration during the time that I've been giving talks about Bitcoin. And they have radically different attitudes towards central banks, spending, etc. So thinking about it in the context of the entire world helps to remove my own political biases. It also removes our financial biases, whether we have or don't have Bitcoin, whether we could have had Bitcoin, whether we could have had more Bitcoin. And also it removes reputational biases. There are a lot of people who found out about Bitcoin in 2012, 2013, and said, this can never work. And now Bitcoin is worth far more than it was. And if those people change their minds, they might feel like they look foolish. And they've staked their reputation on Bitcoin ultimately being worthless. In the end, whenever the end is, it will go to zero. But if they remove themselves from the equation and think about everyone, they can get past this idea that their reputation is staked to Bitcoin. So this is the overall guiding question. If you didn't know who in the entire world you would be when you woke up tomorrow, would you want Bitcoin to exist? Would you want to wake up in a world with Bitcoin or a world that's as much like this one as possible, but without the existence of Bitcoin? So I want to think through three dimensions through which we can think about that question: monetary policy, privacy, and censorship and inclusion, which kind of go together. So here's some expected utility calculus for who you're likely to be in the world and how to evaluate whether it's good that Bitcoin exists. And we should also keep in mind this important risk principle from a philosopher at Princeton, Laura Bushak. She thinks that expected utility is not quite enough to capture a lot of our decision making because some people are willing to risk more than others are. So we have to factor in an individual's risk attitude when deciding whether they should say, take a bet that gives you a 75% chance of becoming a billionaire, but a 25% chance of being completely broke and living on the street. Expected utility says to do it because you're more likely to become a billionaire. But risk-adjusted expected utility might tell you not to do it because the risk of being completely destitute is too great, even if it's only 25%. And then she adds this further thing. Sometimes we're not making decisions for ourselves based on our own risk attitudes. We're making decisions for others. And when we're making decisions for others, we can use their risk attitudes. But when we don't know their risk attitudes, such as when we're deciding for the entire world, we should be more risk averse. That is, we should care about the people who have the most to lose. And I think that's a reasonable principle. So people who have a lot to gain and not much to lose when it comes to Bitcoin, we shouldn't care about them as much as people who have a lot to lose. In either case, the Bitcoin case or the no Bitcoin case. Okay, so let's start with thinking about monetary policy. There is in philosophy a literature on the problem of luck, which is sometimes you get credit or blame for something that you had no power to bring about or not. You are put in a situation through no fault of your own and also through no good things that you did. And being born is a good case. You had no choice about who your parents would be, what your situation was until at least the age of 7 or 8, and maybe well past that. You couldn't leave your house. You had to have the parents that you did. So you were born in a particular place at a particular time, and that was not a result of your own choice. And the place that you lived had a government-backed currency that it had, and that also was in no part up to you. You were born into a monetary regime. Some people got lucky, and the monetary regime they were born into is well managed, and some people were not, and the monetary regime they were born into was not well managed. And again, they had no choice about it. So there are two distinct aspects of a monetary regime. You have monetary policy and then monetary institutions, which decide the monetary policy. Either or both of those can be good or bad. Sometimes the monetary policies can be good, but the institutions can be bad, which means that the policies are likely to go bad pretty soon. Sometimes the institutions can be good. They can have a good transfer of power. They can have good governance structures, but the particular policies are bad. Maybe because the people in the institutions think they know more than they do, or they got unlucky. As of 2024, there were at least 69 economies, or 2022, sorry, 69 economies with confirmed double-digit inflation. And those economies represented the local currencies of more than 2.1 billion people. So more than 25% of the world lived in a country with at least double-digit inflation during that 1 year. Those countries are represented in orange here. And the numbers are here. So Ethiopia had 94% year-over-year inflation in 2022. Nigeria, 78%. Egypt, 58%. This is just an arbitrary year. So some inflation goes up and down. Sometimes there's a one-time inflation shock. Some countries at some times have been significantly worse than this. Zimbabwe at one time had over 1,000,000% year-over-year inflation. Venezuela, the same. But at least in these countries at one particular year, if you held on to the monetary regime that you were born into, if you held into that currency, your purchasing power was in Ethiopia being cut almost in half in 1 year. And as John Maynard Keynes pointed out, there's no subtler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of society than to debauch the currency. In the best situations with decent money, you have a price guarantee, an inflation target that is very low, maybe zero. In the US, it's 2%. And that guarantees that if you hold on to the currency for 1 year, you can purchase roughly 98% of the value of the previous year. That comes with no quantity guarantee. There are very few levers by which you can try to move the purchasing power, the inflation target. And one of those is printing money or taking money out of circulation. So in order to fulfill the price guarantee, you can't have a quantity guarantee. You have to have a variable supply that's at the whim of a monetary institution. In the worst cases, you get neither. There's no quantity guarantee, and there's also no price guarantee, either because they're making mistakes or they're printing money and giving it to themselves, depending on the regime. Bitcoin works a little differently. Bitcoin's monetary policies are written into the algorithm. There will be ultimately about 21 million Bitcoin. It will enter the world on a very specific schedule involved in block production and block reward halvings. So you can calculate at any one time, within a couple hundred Bitcoin, exactly how much Bitcoin there will be in the world at that time. The monetary institutions don't exist either. They're also the algorithm. So Bitcoin provides an option for people who are born in any monetary regime. Do you stay in your monetary regime, or do you move to this other one? And it's a different calculation. Bitcoin has no price guarantee, but it has a quantity guarantee. Because you can't have a price guarantee and a quantity guarantee, you have to choose one of those. And every single governmental monetary regime in existence has chosen to try for the price guarantee. Bitcoin goes for the quantity guarantee. Because supply and demand changes, because demand changes, since the supply is fixed, you can't have a price guarantee with Bitcoin. For a lot of people who are born into decent money, this is a bad trade. You are giving up relatively stable price guarantee for incredibly unstable price guarantee. Bitcoin has been around long enough that we have seen 80% drops in the purchasing power within a matter of days. So for a lot of people who are living in decent money, they don't want to adopt this volatility. They don't choose it. For people who are living in bad money, though, where there's no price guarantee and no quantity guarantee, this third column looks pretty good. At least there's some guarantee. So depending on who you are in the world, Bitcoin will look better or worse. For roughly 25% of the people who are experiencing double-digit inflation, a quantity guarantee might look good. So Bitcoin has a transparent monetary policy. It's written in the code. Anyone can read the code. And then if you know enough about computer science, you can know what it says. Otherwise, you can ask other people, as I have done. And it's transparent in that you can see exactly what it is. It's general in that it doesn't talk about particular people, particular times, particular countries, and it's predictable. It will extend into the future. Bitcoin's monetary policy has not changed since it was launched 16 years ago. There's a major trade-off. There's no price guarantee. And pretty transparently so. Bitcoin does not look at the outside world to see what the demand is for Bitcoin and try to adjust the supply based on that. There is no adjustment to supply ever, other than a constantly increasing at a slower and slower rate. So if you didn't know who you'd be in the world, if there was an equal chance that you'd end up as anyone, but you know that you have roughly a 25% chance of being born into a monetary regime, at least in one particular year, that had double-digit inflation, would you want Bitcoin around as an option that you could still choose not to be involved in or not? So that's the monetary policy argument for Bitcoin from behind the veil of ignorance. Here's the privacy one. Some people think that privacy is secrecy, that private information is stuff that nobody knows or that only you know. But really, privacy is the ability to selectively share information about yourself with others. You will share information with your doctor that you might not share with your best friend or your partner. And similarly, you'll share information with your best friend or partner that you won't share with your doctor or your lawyer. Privacy is the ability to decide who gets to know various things about you. And one of the most important things that people can know about you is how you spend your money. What you spend money on is an indication of what your values are. If you don't think that financial privacy matters, imagine sharing with this room a list of everything that you've bought or everything that you've donated to in the last 30 days or 1 year. And let us talk about it and discuss it and point out interesting things and be the topic of conversation for the next 15 minutes. Most of us probably wouldn't want to do that. Now, we also, though, think that for things that we buy with credit cards, there is a list of the things that we've spent money on. We just don't think that anyone will care enough to look at it very carefully. The faceless bureaucrats at PayPal, Venmo, Visa, etc., probably don't pay that much attention to us. So we know the information is out there. It's not private. It's not secret. But we think that's probably okay. Until we start maybe attracting the attention of the wrong kind of people. And then it might get a little scary for us that all this information is out there. So you might want an option to sometimes pay with a currency that is more like cash. Your cash transactions are not recorded. The only people that know what you've spent cash on are yourself and the person you've given cash to. And there are even ways of bringing more privacy to cash transactions. Think of sealed envelopes taped under benches or something like that. There's a way to remove even your identity from cash transactions. So Bitcoin is kind of like cash in the privacy that it gives, with one notable exception. The Bitcoin ledger that records all Bitcoin transactions that have ever existed and have ever happened is public. Now, it doesn't have your name on it, but it does have Bitcoin addresses and amounts. And it has every time that any address has ever sent Bitcoin to another address. So if you can at any point ever be linked to a Bitcoin address, you can then be linked to every other address that it's ever sent anything to, and every address that it's ever received anything from, and so on along the spidery forking paths of chains. And those transactions are in the ledger forever. Much like Visa, we don't think that people will probably dedicate significant resources to figuring out our own Bitcoin transactions because they're not for things that are very important. But if you are or at any point become a person of interest from a government or corporation powerful enough to care about you, they might start trying to link you to different Bitcoin addresses and figure out what you've spent Bitcoin on. There are a number of ways of making Bitcoin more private. Privacy tools like coin joins, like the Lightning Network. I won't get into those because we don't have time. But they make Bitcoin even more like cash. The Lightning Network is like envelopes with cash inside, but nested inside of other envelopes inside of other envelopes. And the instructions just say to pass it on. Coin joins pool Bitcoin and then distribute it. And they are also under attack by various governments for this very fact. So privacy tools built on Bitcoin allow Bitcoin to achieve nearly the same cash-like privacy. There's a coin join transaction, for example. So you may or may not care about your financial transactions being private. You may not worry that your government will at some point decide that you're doing something wrong. You may not worry that your data is being bought and sold by corporations in an effort to sell you even more things. But on the other hand, from behind the veil of ignorance, you might be someone who lives in Zimbabwe and is protesting a dictatorship. You might be someone who lives in China and is off of the government's list of good people. Or you might worry that your democracy is increasingly unstable and that someone will come to power who will decide that your kind is no longer desired in the country and is trying to find out, say, who has ever donated to certain political parties or groups and punishing those people. In any of those cases, you might want an option that looks a lot more like digital cash. Finally, so we did monetary policy, privacy. Now I'll move on to censorship and exclusion. Many freedoms that people find valuable, freedom of speech, freedom to write things, freedom to assemble, to get together in groups, religious freedom, require money. They require being able to spend money. Unless you want to walk or bike everywhere, you might need to buy a car, or you might need to buy public transit or an Uber. You might have to buy a server to host your ideas that you publish online. So in order to enjoy many of the things that we find valuable in the world, that we consider freedoms that we ought to have, we need to be able to spend money. And in order to spend money freely, we require digital cash. You might be able to spend money on these things using digital money that's not digital cash, but you won't be freely spending it. You'll be spending it with the permission of governments and corporations who allow you to do that. I've taken 3 Ubers since I've been here, and every single one of them, I asked Visa for permission to spend money, and then Visa transferred it to the driver. I'm traveling here with the permission of the Visa Corporation. And at any point, they could say, these transactions look suspicious. You're cut off. And then I'll have no way to get back to the hotel other than the kindness and generosity of my hosts. So I recognize that I'm spending money here unfreely. It's working, but it's not free. I'm requiring the permission of others in order to do it. What we've regularly found is that these trusted parties, the people that we rely on to manage our money and to mediate our transactions, censor and exclude. Not everyone can get a Visa card. You have to apply. They have to approve your application. Same with all other credit card companies. Not every bank allows everyone to have an account at that bank. They exclude people. 1 in 2 people live under what the Human Rights Coalition considers an authoritarian or authoritarian-leaning regime. And 1 in 6 people in the world are unbanked, have no bank account. There's quite a bit of overlap between these two things, as you might imagine. So this isn't saying that 4 out of every 6 people are one of these two. But there are plenty of people who lack access to a bank account and so do everything with physical cash and physical commodities that they have in their house. And for them, digital spending of any kind, whether money or cash, is impossible. So digital cash is just digital money without these extra trusted parties. Gone over that before. There are some harms to a network that doesn't allow for censorship. It makes money laundering more easy. There's no trusted parties who can step in and stop transactions that look suspicious, and so money laundering becomes easier. Same with sanctions evasion. So this is one of the arguments that Democrats in US Congress are giving against Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies is the US likes to sanction various countries at different times and not allow them to transact with US dollars. And we've managed to get to a point where much of the global economy is conducted in US dollars. That gives the United States a tremendous amount of power to decide who's allowed to spend and who isn't. And it makes sanctions by the US particularly bad for different countries. Bitcoin allows countries to evade, especially US sanctions, more easily because there is nobody to step in and stop them. It also allows, makes it more easy, at least, to conduct ransomware. So ransomware is when you disclose a critical vulnerability to a digital system and extort people for money so that you either remove a virus or never install it, etc. Ransomware was going on before Bitcoin, but Bitcoin made it easier to get paid digitally in ways that were untraceable. So, stepping back again behind the veil of ignorance, if you didn't know who in the world you would you want money that others can't control? Would you want money that would allow you to freely transact with whoever you wanted without the permission of anyone else? Based on the data about authoritarian regimes and being unbanked, there's a greater than 50% chance that you would be someone who either lives under authoritarianism or doesn't have a bank account. If you were one of those people, would you want to live in a world where you could access Bitcoin? I'll go through the security through energy really fast. So there's a pretty big trade-off, which is that in order to prevent double spending, as digital cash needs to do, Bitcoin uses a proof of work system that requires a significant amount of energy. The way to prevent double spending is forcing people to expend a concrete physical resource that they can't get back. And the way to double spend on Bitcoin is to expend a lot of energy to roll back the chain of transactions to insert a different one where you had previously inserted one. So you spend money on, let's say, buying a car, you send someone Bitcoin, then you go home and you feverishly try to roll back the blockchain to that point where you spent the Bitcoin, and instead of sending it to the car dealer, you send it to yourself. And now you have a car and the Bitcoin that you had spent on the car. This is really hard to do with Bitcoin because people are constantly churning through energy. And the argument is that Bitcoin uses too much energy for no good reason. It's an environmental disaster. The academic papers that have been written about Bitcoin that aren't about price tend to be about Bitcoin's effect on climate. So in order to evaluate these, we need to know how much energy is too much, what sorts of reasons are good reasons, and whether Bitcoin is really an environmental disaster. It's hard to decide how much too much energy is until we decide whether the reasons for using it are good or not. And the reason for spending energy on Bitcoin is because people want to. People find Bitcoin valuable and they're willing to expend the energy that it takes to do the Bitcoin mining. And at any point, anyone could decide that it's not worth it and stop, and Bitcoin would use less energy. And what they're doing when they expend this energy on Bitcoin is promoting a money that has an algorithmic monetary policy with no leaders, that doesn't allow for censorship or exclusion, and that is relatively private. So it's up to each of us to decide whether we think that's a good thing, whether the energy is being used for no good reason or not. We're also getting a lot more data about whether Bitcoin is actually an environmental disaster. And there could be a whole separate talk on what kind of energy is being used for Bitcoin and how that's changed. But I would say Bitcoin is increasingly moving in the direction of not just being not as bad for the environment, but actually becoming good for the environment. But we could get into that in Q&A if we want. I'll skip all of the stuff. So scorecard in the end, we're evaluating Bitcoin from the perspective of being behind the veil of ignorance. What is our overall evaluation? I'm not going to make the evaluation for you, but here we have, as of 2023, the Economic Intelligence Unit Freedom Index, the percentage of citizens of that country who are unbanked, and the percentage of inflation. These represent a significant percentage of the world's population. You see China at the bottom, which already represents a significant percentage of the world's population. And in very few of these places are all of these numbers and colors the kind that would not make you worried at any point. Now, I don't know how seriously to take the Freedom Index. These things change. I believe the United States hovers between full democracy and flawed democracy, depending on the year. But there's cause for concern in a lot of these places, especially places that are authoritarian with a high percentage of unbanked people and a high inflation percentage. And there's a decent chance from behind the veil that you are one of those people. If you talk to those people, which I do, because I go to human rights conferences and talk to them about Bitcoin, a lot of them say, I wouldn't be alive right now if it wasn't for Bitcoin. Either I wouldn't have been able to find food, or the dictator who's in charge of my country would have found me and punished me, etc. So even if there's a small risk of being one of those people whose life is saved by Bitcoin, it's such a great good that it might be enough on its own. So for me, at least, the scorecard comes out in favor of Bitcoin. When I step behind the veil, if I didn't know who I would be in the world, I would want to step back into a world with Bitcoin rather than a world without Bitcoin. Your evaluation may differ, but I suggest that this is the best way of evaluating it. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much for listening. I will say that we are under contract with for a Portuguese translation of the book, which should be coming. It's been being worked on for several months now. It should be coming in February or March of 2026. I believe, unfortunately, that it's Portuguese. But hopefully there could be some pressure on that translator to release a Brazilian Portuguese translation. But anyway, thank you.
Okay, well, that's great news. Thank you so much, Professor Rattler, for your very provoking talk. We have time to get, maybe could get every round 2 or 3 questions together and then.
Sure.
Okay. And we have a microphone if you want to make the question.
And I can go back to any slide that anyone.
Yeah.
Hits.
Please.
Thank you, Professor Rattler, for your wonderful presentation. Bitcoin has been an obsession for me for the last 8 years in my life, and also legal and moral philosophy has been an obsession for me. And I found your work wonderful. I haven't read your book, but your presentation was quite insightful. And because these questions, I've been thinking about the morality of Bitcoin and the morality of money itself. And I think money represents a moral relationship with other people expressed in the concept of altruism, reciprocal altruism. I do something good for you, and you give something good for me in exchange. And this is a form of moral relationship that we need. We need reciprocal altruism with people that we don't know. That's why we need money and monetary goods. So I think the foundation of money itself is a moral foundation, because if we only have reciprocal altruism with keen altruism, and we have only small communities, we need to expand the moral concern and do good for people that we don't know. That's why we need money. So I think the moral justification of money itself is a quite interesting subject. But I think Bitcoin is a representation of this in the cyberspace. So we can do moral things with people. I receive goods and services in exchange. I exchange with a good, sound money in cyberspace that we don't have in fiat currencies. And but in your presentation, I have some ideas to add and to exchange with you. When you say monetary rule of law, I think that we have something more than the attributes that you expressed there. I think to have monetary rule of law, we need a voluntary rules applied to me, and Bitcoin is that. In fiat money, we have violence, something that justifies legal tender law, monopoly, legal monopolies, that fiat money needs to exist. And Bitcoin is open, so it's open to mine. Anyone can mine, anyone can use, anyone can program. It's an open source program, a protocol. And the fiat money systems, only few can program the system, only representatives and regulatory agencies, and not anyone can be a bank. So we need bank licenses. And Bitcoin is the perfect combination of the idea of rule of law and money itself. But I think we have to say more emphatically that fiat money itself is an act of violence, because before that was the gold standard, and the gold standard was the option of the market. It emerged through freedom and freedom exchange, and fiat money came about in this century, the last century, through an act of violence. So in my opinion, fiat money, it's like a state of exception. You make exceptions, and you can retroact. You can it does not offer final settlements, and Bitcoin offer also final settlements. And to conclude my remarks, I think that Bitcoin express an inner morality that we can treat each other with equal respect. It's open, it's transparent, it's equal. If I have 1 Bitcoin or 100 Bitcoins, I will be treated as the same. So, but in the fiat standard, we have banking licenses. Banks can create money by lending money, expanding credit bubbles. We don't have this in Bitcoin. And this is the inner morality of Bitcoin. But I think we have, in your terms, expected utility, that Bitcoin will contribute to human flourishing by using energy sources that are stranded by mining. So I think the moral components of Bitcoin are very large and very profound, and I think will be a revolution in our moral landscape. So that's my. Thank
you. Okay.
That was a lot. That was a lot of questions.
Hello. Yeah, let's talk about a little bit institutionalization of Bitcoin. Let's talk about, for example, Cynthia Lumens in your state. She's talking about the Bitcoin strategy reserve. Let's talk about like BlackRock. Let's talk about Wall Street. All those institutions, all those companies are getting around Bitcoin. What about ethics about it? We, in my opinion, we truly believe that the Bitcoin so strong, so beautiful, so give us freedom, unbelievable that even with these those institutions getting around, the United States getting around with the Bitcoin strategy reserve, Wall Street, and all of those, I think that we will come true. You know, it's going to be stronger, even stronger Bitcoin and the ethos. But the cypherpunks, they think that maybe it's kind of the roots are kind of far behind. What is going on? I don't know. I would like to hear your opinion about what do you think about those institutions getting around the Bitcoin treasury companies that we are seeing around, like MSTR in the United States. There is a huge institution getting around. So I would like to hear a little bit about it, because it's kind of interesting, you know, big institutions getting around, and when the initial concept, well, not what I believe that the peer-to-peer cash system was not exactly what they meant, but the evolution is beautiful, right?
Should I? Sure. I'm taking notes, so that's
Okay.
great.
Anyone? Please.
Good morning, everyone. Bradley, it's good to see you again. We last met at the MIT in an event, which was a technical event, and I miss a lot this kind of philosophical and moral, and I would like to say soft discussions, not to diminish this kind of discussion, but because it makes us imagine a world that does not exist, but maybe it gives us some motivation to build something and to make it better, right? And I don't exactly have a question, but your proposition of this veil of ignorance as a point of view to try to analyze what's happening right now just made me think of a competing perspective that I would like to propose, maybe not for now, but maybe for keep thinking and talking about it, which is this question. How do you see a world in which Bitcoin existed and no longer is? Because you are discussing a world in which Bitcoin exists, and there is a kind of assumption that it will keep existing, right? But what if this is not the case? What if the Bitcoin, for some reason, I don't know, government or its just flawed, technically flawed, and it will not prevail. How do you see a world in which Bitcoin does not exist anymore?
All right. You all can think of more questions while I answer these. So yeah, I think starting with Guilherme's point, that thinking of money as encoding morality is interesting. When in the best cases, money is used voluntarily and transactions happen voluntarily. People aren't being stolen from. And what happens in those transactions is one person exchanges money for something they would like. And the person would rather have the thing than the money. And the person who's selling the thing would rather have the money than the thing. And both of you get to live out your beliefs about what's best for you. And money allows that much more easily than if you had to trade chickens or metals or something. So what Bitcoin does in that case is just opens up who can transact with who. It's very hard to transact across monetary systems through intermediaries. If you tried after the Russian invasion of Ukraine to send money to Ukraine, it was very difficult. But it was very easy to send Bitcoin. On point two, about fiat money. So I want to make the case for Bitcoin without saying anything negative about fiat money, because I don't think you have to. So your point that Bitcoin is optional is really important there, I think. Bitcoin is there for anyone who wants to opt in. It does not force anyone to opt in. In the US, you have to pay taxes in US dollars, and everyone has to pay taxes. So you have to have US dollars. It is not an optional system. Bitcoin is optional at all levels. And I think that's one of the good and interesting things about it. On the question of centralization and in the treasury companies and the strategic Bitcoin reserve, 2 points on that. So one is, to go back to Guilherme's point, people care whether you have 1 Bitcoin or 100 Bitcoin. People will treat you differently. The Bitcoin protocol doesn't care at all. It governs every transaction of arbitrary amounts exactly the same. It won't award you more blocks or award you more Bitcoin. Whereas what Guilherme said about commercial banks is absolutely right. You have to, not just anyone can get a commercial bank license and then the right to print money in terms of loans. There you have to demonstrate. In fact, there's a bank in my home state of Wyoming that is trying to get a master account at the Federal Reserve that's been repeatedly denied. And there are gatekeepers there that look at assets and structure and say, you are not allowed to do this. Bitcoin doesn't look at any of those things. So the US, Senator Lemus would like the US to acquire 5% of all Bitcoin, I think. That won't make the US any more powerful with respect to the Bitcoin protocol. It will make them able to spend more Bitcoin, but it won't have them treated any differently. They won't be more likely to mine any blocks or be able to double spend or anything like that. So I think that's a really interesting aspect of Bitcoin, is that regardless of how much you have, that doesn't benefit you except for, how much you can transact. And same with treasury companies. So I am a little worried about something in the neighborhood, which is that if people decide that they don't need to self-custody their Bitcoin, and instead they're going to buy shares of a company that is just going to exist to hold Bitcoin for them, number one, that stops Bitcoin from being money, because money is a commonly accepted medium of exchange. And these companies aren't exchanging any Bitcoin. They're just acquiring it and then holding it. So it becomes an asset, but not money. And the further worry is that at some point, they're going to get together, all these companies, and say, Bitcoin has to be held by us. We're going to introduce a fork to Bitcoin. And if you have any with us, you have to accept this fork. and it's going to make self-custody Bitcoin not real Bitcoin anymore. I think there might be ways of doing that and just declaring that this thing that they hold is Bitcoin and this thing that other people self-custody and use as a medium of exchange, that's not real Bitcoin anymore. And so it's not an attack on the protocol, but it is an attack on the term Bitcoin. And we've seen Bitcoin fork in the past based on ideology. And then the winner is the person who gets to continue being Bitcoin. And the forks have to adopt some other name, Bitcoin Cash, Bitcoin SV, Bitcoin ABC. There's a bunch. So it's a semantic attack. And that would be bad for, in my view, Bitcoin as resistance money. It would be bad for the people I think need Bitcoin the most, which are not people that are buying shares of ETFs and treasury companies, but people that are buying Bitcoin directly and using it because that's their best option, not as an asset. And then finally, the last question about a world in which Bitcoin has existed, but then no longer exists. I think a lot depends on why Bitcoin no longer exists. Maybe it's because central banks just get way better at hitting price targets and inflation targets, and inflation stops. And then we're like, what was the point of it? We're using all this energy to secure this money that doesn't do anything better. Governments aren't targeting people. There's no censorship. Banks are open to all. Inflation's not a problem. That would be awesome. If Bitcoin went away for that reason, that would be great. Bitcoin might go away because of quantum computing. I think that's a very different future than this other one. In there, Bitcoin is vulnerable for the same reason that like nuclear codes are vulnerable. And that's a world in which we need to drastically rethink everything. And then something comes along probably that looks much like Bitcoin in all these other ways that I've talked about, privacy, censorship, monetary policy, but is quantum resistant. So maybe there are other ways that Bitcoin could go out of existence as well. Some of them would be utopian and some of them would be dystopian. Some would be great for the world and some would be awful for the world. And it just depends, I think, on how you fill in the particulars.
More questions?
Hey, we always talk about Bitcoin as sound money, and you talk a little bit about Bitcoin as energy money, like the interface between Bitcoin mining and energy prices, not only if it's good or bad for environment, but also the main point is like the relationship between price energy and flourishing of humankind, and how you see Bitcoin mining affecting that.
Yeah. With gold and with Bitcoin, the asset or money represents physical effort. You had to mine the gold with a machine and get it out of the ground and refine it and purify it. And with Bitcoin, you had to solve an energy intensive math problem that required a lot of electricity. So the marginal cost of adding new units to gold or Bitcoin is significant. The marginal cost of adding $1 trillion US is nothing. just pressing enter on a computer. So yeah, they represent very different things. And so the second part of the question is what does that mean for money? Yeah. Yeah, so it makes inflation of the currency nearly impossible or non-existent, because in order to introduce more units, you have to spend more, and what are you spending if not that currency? So in the world where there's both kinds, at least for now, you can get by buying the thing that has a marginal cost of production, like gold or Bitcoin, with a thing that doesn't. It might be that at some point, people catch on that that's a bad idea. And it depends who catches on first. If a government decides, I'm just going to print as much money as possible to buy gold and Bitcoin before people realize what I'm doing, that would be interesting. And I take some of the US strategic Bitcoin reserve discussion to be like this. We can print as much money as we want at any time and just add it to our national debt and use it to acquire something that we can't print ourselves. Why aren't we doing this a lot more? The other part of the strategic Bitcoin reserve discussion is using gold, selling the gold and buying Bitcoin. So yeah, I do think that it makes money represent work in a way that it doesn't currently. And at least it doesn't currently in this obvious of a way. It makes it hard to produce and therefore I think more valuable, more interesting. Yep.
I have one question. It's more sociological than philosophical. If Bitcoin is good, why only a few geeks like us and like it? Do you think we have more awareness of the harms of fiat currency? Bitcoin is only 16 years old, but we might get there, that we were going to live in a Bitcoin utopia, in a Bitcoin standard? Or do you think the people are so accustomed with debt slavery that we live in right now? What's your opinion about the sociological point of view of why haven't we reached hyper Bitcoinization yet? Why it's taking so long? Because I often hear criticism saying, "Well, Bitcoin is a failed experiment because we don't live right now in the Bitcoin standard. We live in the fiat standard, but we have this alternative, this niche alternative that only a few people care about." And this is the first part of question, and depending on your answer, what we should do to bring Bitcoin, this good news to the world more effectively.
Thanks. So some of you or all of you may know that there's a Bitcoin conference going on tomorrow and Saturday.
We have the tickets for the audience. If you want to go there, SatsConf is tomorrow and Saturday. Lucas, the organizer, said to me that we are offering free tickets to the whole audience. If you want to go there, sorry.
Yeah, so come. No, I was hoping you would say that. So come talk to Guilherme afterwards if you want a free ticket to the Bitcoin conference. At the Bitcoin conference, I'm talking about how to talk to people about Bitcoin, especially people who are skeptical and people who are curious. So yeah, roughly 90% of the people in the world have heard of Bitcoin by now, have at least heard the term. And 65% of people have no intention of ever buying Bitcoin. And I wonder why, having heard about it, would people not want to? So I think the people who believe in Bitcoin need to do better at talking to those people about what Bitcoin is, what it represents, and why they like it. So I'm just giving some principles for how to talk to people about Bitcoin, which starts with asking them questions like, what do you know? What have you heard? Well, now if you come to my talk, you're gonna get two, but and then sort of telling stories. I think right now, what represents Bitcoin in the mind of those people are politicians and BlackRock and maybe some people in Silicon Valley, tech nerds, etc. And that's not who is mostly using Bitcoin. At least if my experiences are somewhat accurate at these human rights conferences, those people are buying Bitcoin and holding on to it. The people who are actually using Bitcoin in their lives are people who are fighting for democracy under authoritarian regimes. People like Alexei Navalny, who led the Russian opposition party until his death a year or so ago, was using exclusively Bitcoin, could not get a Russian bank account. Zimbabwe, Togo, Rwanda, Hong Kong, people are using Bitcoin so that they are not targeted by their governments. So I feel like if people knew more stories about that, they would understand Bitcoin as resistance money. So I don't so much come to Bitcoin. I think there's like two major ways that people approach Bitcoin. And one way is this sound money idea. The other way is this private censorship resistant currency. And they're both true. I think we haven't done enough to talk about the second thing. Most of the probably the most popular Bitcoin book is the Bitcoin Standard, which doesn't talk about privacy or censorship resistance at all. It's like 8 chapters on how great gold is. And then, oh yeah, Bitcoin is like gold, but digital. And I think we do people a disservice by talking mostly about sound money and not talking about private money, about censorship resistant, about radically inclusive money, anti-authoritarian, anti-dictator money. That's just me, and it's good to have both narratives out there because they are both true. But I think most people that we would talk to care more about private censorship resistant stuff. I saw a hand over here too.
So,
Okay.
Professor Ratley, thank you for your presentation. I have a question. I would like to radicalize the word that Guilherme imagined. Imagine a world where we had the triumph of Bitcoin. Everyone is using Bitcoin, and the fiat standard went out, and Bitcoin is very strong. It's good for everyone. And in this world, I would like to question you about 3 things. The first one is about the finance model, because there are some theories that points that in order to have innovation, in order to have new things, in order to leverage in the economy, we have to be allowed to get credit, for example, in this world where Bitcoin triumphed, as Bitcoin doesn't have the elasticity to increase its quantity, maybe we would have some troubles with financing because we would not be allowed to leverage by credit. This is the first question. What would be the financing model in this world? The second question is about crisis management, because we have today a lot of books. Is the theme of one of the points of the themes of my PhD thesis is about the role of central banks as crisis managers, and we have a lot of books about this role, and we are seeing that in each crisis that we have, the powers of central banks grow, and I would like to question you about how would we manage a crisis in this world where Bitcoin triumphed? And the third question is about the value of Bitcoin, because in this world where Bitcoin triumphed, we would have maybe the fiat money as an option or not, or a world where we have just the Bitcoin standard. But in this world, would be Bitcoin valuable in the sense that maybe some people would hold more Bitcoins than others, and it could cause, for example, the problems that we have with the fiat standard, inequality and these things. And with Bitcoin, as we don't have the possibility to increase the quantity, maybe the inequality would be sharp because we would not have a distribution of this amount of Bitcoin. And in this sense, if we conclude that in this world where Bitcoin triumphed, we would have this kind of problems, Bitcoin is only valuable
as a resistance money in the sense that there is something to resist, in the case the fiat standard, or in this sense, Bitcoin is only valuable because there is this other side to resist. So it's necessary to have this other side, or Bitcoin in this world would be valuable inherently. It would have an inner value, even if we don't have anything to resist. So thank you for.
Thank you. Yeah, so on the finance credit question, it right now is easier to pay back loans than it will be or would be if you're borrowing Bitcoin. Right now, if you take out a loan, you expect to have to pay back in less purchasing power than what you take out. So the current financial system rewards people who can get loans at interest rates that are below the rate of inflation, at least. In a Bitcoin loan, you are not going to be able to pay back less than what you borrow. And I mean, right now, it would be, I think, foolish to take out a loan in Bitcoin because you have no idea what you're going to have to pay back next year. It could be, I mean, you know, in Bitcoin terms, but in terms of purchasing power, it could be the equivalent of half or the equivalent of 10 times the amount. So it's very risky. In the world you're imagining, Bitcoin is slightly more stable, but not perfectly stable, because demand will always fluctuate a little bit. And so I think what we know is that it won't be this steadily depreciating amount. And that means that you have to be a lot more confident in what you're using the loan to buy. If it's to start a business, you have to be a lot more confident that your business is going to work out. I don't know what bankruptcies will look like in Bitcoin or defaults on loans, or so I'm not, I'm a philosophy professor. I will hazard a bit of a guess. But yes, credit will be harder to get, I think. And the people who get it will be taking on more risk. In terms of crisis management, very much depends. So you said in one version, maybe fiat is an option. In another one, it's not. So right now, central banks can still respond to crises by printing money. We had in the US $600 payments to everyone during COVID. Just brand new money that was created just for that purpose. And if you look at the graph of US debt, there's this huge spike when everyone gets $600. So that's still an option. In Bitcoin, it becomes harder. We have a strategic Bitcoin reserve, let's say, and then we have to decide as a country, do we send people Bitcoin out of this reserve? Is this a crisis that's worth using up some of our reserve for? And maybe we think, yeah, because we'll get it back when they buy things, and then there's taxes, and we'll pay the taxes in Bitcoin. That's if fiat isn't an option. If it is, then you could just do the same thing. So just like credit gets harder, it gets harder just because you're giving up something that's more valuable that you can't immediately replace in the way that you can immediately replace dollars by pressing a button on a computer. And then the last question on inequality, I think that's the hardest one. But I start by noting that the world right now is pretty unequal and has been trending significantly more unequal. I think I tweeted something or posted something on Facebook in like 2020 that said Elon Musk is going to start acquiring Bitcoin soon. You get in before Elon Musk does. And since then, Elon Musk's net worth has, gone up 10 or 20 times as much. And he's also started talking about and probably buying Bitcoin. So yeah, people who currently have assets that they can trade for Bitcoin will do better than people who don't. So I don't think Bitcoin solves the crazy wealth inequality. I do think that it maybe halts it at its current spot and maybe starts to make it a little bit better, because the system itself doesn't reward people who are able to take on loans and get credit very easily and then live off their assets and pay back the loan slowly and things like that. So I think the system is more just, and I actually think, so we have the distributional side and then the principles side. I think the principles are more just, and I think that will probably lead to a better distribution, especially in the long term. But it's certainly not going to solve the problem. Is Bitcoin still resistance money? You can start handing. Bitcoin is less resistance money in terms of like competing against other monies. But as long as there are predatory companies and aspiring authoritarians and dictators, then Bitcoin will still be resistance money in that sense, that it's private and censorship resistant. Yeah, thanks.
I'd like to add to the questions that he brought up, because I find them very interesting in the sense that Bitcoin makes everybody question the status quo. So is it a good thing that bank managers can lend out money with little risk, and therefore you have more money for people to do risky things, which could be good because then you have innovation, but which could be bad because people are spending money in stupid ways that they wouldn't do if the money were their own. So if a bank cannot create money out of thin air to lend out, it has to take the Bitcoin out of its cold wallet and give it to somebody that they will think 3 times before lending out. And for instance, the lending crisis that you had in the US 2008, 2009 was in great part because banks were very big risk takers, because they knew the consequences were not very bad for them, right? And the inequality part of it, you also question. So Bitcoin is the most capitalistic thing that has ever been invented. It only wants of anybody who participates on it to be to think only of themselves. So miners will mine Bitcoin because they want to get Bitcoin, because they can sell Bitcoin and do nice things with them. I want to preserve the Bitcoin network because if I attack it and I have Bitcoin, the value of my Bitcoin goes down. So it won't change capitalism, right? But it might affect some of the mechanisms that we have inside of capitalism that might be very unjust, right? So if you have political power and you're close to the source of the money, you might get wealthier quicker than if you are just a very bright person with very hard working skills and need the credit to do the things that you want. So questioning the structures that exist is, I think, one of the very valuable things that we have in Bitcoin, because it makes everybody think about the status quo, if they like Bitcoin, if they don't like Bitcoin. I am pretty convinced that the instant payment system we have in Brazil came about quicker and in a different manner because everybody was aware that now it's possible to make something like that, and it doesn't have to follow the same patterns that we had before. So just the existence of Bitcoin as an option to any system makes people in those systems at least reconsider what they're doing and possibly make those systems better. So that's my positive attitude towards that.
Yeah, I like all of what you said. I would add a little bit on, there's a question up there for the next one. I'd add one more thing about Bitcoin reforming the bad parts of capitalism. So there were companies in the US that would hire workers and then pay them in a currency that the company invented. And the company would own the grocery store in town, and they would own the car mechanics in town. And the money was only good in that town, but you had to use it. And this was a way of basically keeping people at the company because all your wealth was in this thing, and the company could give you as much or as little as you wanted, and there was no way to save up to get out. And in a way, government-backed currencies are kind of like that. Now, the very best ones are accepted other places, but a lot of them aren't. And this is a way of keeping people not enslaved in the same way that people were actually slaves. I hate using that word. So it's a way to keep people captive to your system. And Bitcoin allows you to opt out of that. And you can take your Bitcoin and leave and go somewhere else that will treat you better. So this is, yeah, it's not necessarily, it's anti-capitalist if you think that one of the main points of capitalism is that the hard work of the people on the bottom filters up to the people at the top. And one of the ways to make sure that happens is to only pay them, to take their labor, get dollars with it, but then give them something else, or get Bitcoin with it, but give them something else. If people start demanding the Bitcoin, and they're more likely to be fairly compensated for their labor and not be in the situation where CEOs are making 450 times the amount that the factory worker is making.
Nice to meet you. I don't mean to scare, but there's an author, Lenin, the Russian one. He speaks about how the monopolies basically and principally on the energy field in 1916 were a problem for the global economy. And during your talk, I noticed that we have two problems: the one with the microchips and the one with the energy. And the energy is still very similar to what Lenin talked about in 1916. And we have the problem with China and the microchips today. That's a problem because, you know, basically everything comes from there. So how we will be able to overcome this problem, these two problems, these two monopolies? Yeah, do you think about an option or?
Great. Yeah, great question. I worry more about the microchip one than the energy one. So one of the things that Bitcoin mining is incentivizing is increased renewable energy capture, and also increased capture of wasted energy. So this is rivers that are moving and nobody's harnessing the energy of the rivers. Places that the sun is shining, but we don't have solar panels. Places where oil wells have been dug and carbon monoxide is being flared or vented next to the oil well, and is just either being lit on fire or going directly into the atmosphere. So when you can use that energy to mine Bitcoin and the energy is free, then you're getting something, at least right now, for nothing. And my suspicion is that more and more we will see Bitcoin mining being pushed to these edges where the energy is free, because it's so competitive and it's so easy to do. You don't need a place with a reliable internet connection. You don't have to transport the energy anywhere. You can bring the little tiny Bitcoin miner to the energy and just set it right there. So we're seeing this in Wyoming now with oil wells, that people just put little huts on the oil well, and the huts mine Bitcoin with the excess energy. So I think it's actually sort of democratizing energy use, at least for Bitcoin. The microchip one is harder because all of the Bitcoin mining, for those who don't know, all Bitcoin mining today is done on application specific circuits. So all they do is mine Bitcoin. They can't do anything else. And they're all produced almost by two companies in China. So one of the things that's happening is people are recognizing that this is a problem and that the hardware might have some problems. If you're a monopoly, you're incentivized to make problems, and also not to work as hard as you could to make the very best thing, because you don't have, as long as it's better than everyone else's, which don't exist, then you'll make money. So Jack Dorsey's company Block is working on Bitcoin mining hardware. And I hope to see a lot more companies get involved, and maybe even for people to buy worse hardware just so that they can sort of spread out the market share of these huge companies. But yeah, I mean, I think there are 4 or 5 pretty serious problems with Bitcoin. And I think we've talked about 3 of them now. One of them is quantum computing. I don't know how seriously to take that. Another one is this BlackRock and US government potential semantic attack. And another one is the centralization of Bitcoin mining hardware, specifically the chips. So yeah, you all are exactly where I am, at least with respect to the concerns about Bitcoin. We need to do better on all of these. And then there are the privacy ones too, I think. I got nothing else to do. I will stay here all day.
Eu falo português e espanhol, não falo muito bem inglês. Se você puder traduzir. É mais um pensamento, não é uma pergunta, né? Alguns pesquisadores dizem que a energia gasta em mineração de Bitcoin, ela é menor do que as luzes de Natal gastas no mundo inteiro. E claro que se esses dados não estiverem corretos, né, existem muitas outras coisas que são imorais, que gastam muito mais energia, como videogames, tabaco, a indústria do tabaco e armas nucleares, que também são coisas que não são tão morais e ninguém discute sobre isso, né? Então, até que certo ponto, a mineração de Bitcoin é imoral.
He's asking, sorry for his English. He's asking about, he saw some kind of data saying that the energy spent in Bitcoin is less than Christmas lights or other immoral things like nuclear weapons or cigars or go on, video games. He's asking about, so how can we, is this really a problem, the energy, or is just about our morality, where there is, and if there is this a problem really, the energy? I think this is the question.
I think that the video game point is polemic, yeah.
They might all be. Yeah, one of my another philosophy professor who works on Bitcoin, Troy Cross, has pointed out that significantly more energy is spent streaming pornography videos than Bitcoin. So it really depends on whether you think Bitcoin is good for the world or not. Christmas lights are good for the world. They don't, except in the energy they use, they don't harm anyone and they look pretty. How good for the world? Not very. It's a very small benefit that they add to the world. Air conditioning uses a lot of energy. That's maybe significantly better for the world. When former Singaporean Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew was asked what allowed Singapore to become such a technological and financial hub in Asia, he said air conditioning. Because instead of sweating in an office and being miserable and using most of your mental energy to figure out how to cool down, you could use it on spreadsheets and cargo and everything. So air conditioning might be way better. Bitcoin has a bunch of good aspects to it. And if you think that, then you'll think that the energy that it uses is not bad. if you already think Bitcoin is bad for the world because it takes away government powers, or it's a Ponzi scheme, or it's worthless, or things like that, then you will think that its energy use only makes those things worse. It has all these other bad things, plus it uses all this energy. So yeah, I think a lot depends on your own evaluation of the other parts of Bitcoin. Even there are some people who don't like Bitcoin, but are recognizing how it's electrifying parts of Africa that have rivers going through them, and they don't have the capital to set up electricity in these villages, but someone can come and put a Bitcoin mine next to the river, harness the energy to mine Bitcoin, take out what they spent plus a little extra, and then leave that thing in the care of the village and move on to another village. And all of a sudden, that village has both electricity and a Bitcoin mine that will steadily accumulate a certain amount of Bitcoin. So some people that I know that I've talked to who are academics who hate Bitcoin recognize that it might be doing this really good thing to bring clean, renewable electricity to Africa. And this is just one example. So yeah, I think it all depends on how much you know about Bitcoin and how you evaluate the other aspects of it. Whether you consider the energy wasted versus a productive thing.
Já foi falado um pouco aqui sobre distribuição. Sobre esse grande tema da desigualdade social, existem problemas, formas de tratar esse problema que já existem, como, por exemplo, impostos. E eu queria que o professor falasse um pouquinho sobre os mecanismos que são atrapalhados pelo Bitcoin, como, por exemplo, esse. O Bitcoin ele facilita em muito sonegação, por exemplo. Nesses casos, o Bitcoin ele ainda é bom para as pessoas que justamente você disse que ajuda?
He's asking about inequality. He sees your argument about the power of Bitcoin, but one reason for inequality is tax evasion. How can we go against it with a system that I cannot apply the state and the powers? How can you prevent tax evasion in a Bitcoin world? I think this is the question.
Yeah, great question. A couple of thoughts. One is we're not doing great at preventing tax evasion now, so maybe it's not going to be that much worse. Another is this might be a reason that governments will never officially adopt Bitcoin. They will always require taxes to be paid in their currencies, and they will pretty tightly try to control on-ramps and off-ramps so that they can try to make all the privacy stuff that I said false and track everything. And the I had one more. Now I can't remember. I guess maybe it will be the case that there will be as much or more tax evasion, but there will be less inequality because of, I mean, I think most inequality, probably depends on where, comes from easy access to credit and debt. That people who already are wealthy can take on debt to buy things that will accumulate in value faster. So the one of the biggest problems in the US and especially New York City is people just parking money in Manhattan real estate. And if the bigger the loan they can get, the more apartments they can buy. Those apartments sit empty. but they gain value faster than the money could. And so people in New York City have nowhere to live. There are entire apartment buildings in downtown Manhattan that are almost completely empty because they're just investment properties. So if you no longer can do that or have to, if Bitcoin becomes a better store of value than Manhattan real estate, or certainly than real estate in other parts of the US or other countries, then I think you'd see inequality go down, even if tax evasion goes up. So yeah, I think that's a really serious concern. And it's maybe another one to put on the negative side of Bitcoin. In addition to sanctions and ransomware and money laundering, it makes tax evasion easier. And of course, the people who have to pay the most taxes will be able to spend the most amount of money and hours learning how to use the Bitcoin privacy tools that make them better at avoiding taxes. So yeah, that's a really good point. And I don't think I have a firm response. I think it's to agree with you that it probably will make it easier, but that maybe other effects will counteract that.
Cypherpunks understood the importance of private money, digital money. In your opinion, or maybe in your research, what have you found about why people don't value privacy?
There are a lot of different reasons from different people. So a lot of the older people that I've talked to about Bitcoin say, I don't need privacy. I've got nothing to hide. I'm fine. They've been through, I mean, and I'm mostly talking to people in the US. They've been through administrations of, all different political parties, and they've never been targeted for their spending. So it doesn't bother them. Another reason is that, and this is mostly for younger people, they grew up with no expectation of privacy. So my undergraduate students who are 18 or 19 years old grew up with the internet and social media and have just understood from the beginning that there's going to be videos of them potentially at any time doing anything. And that's just the world we live in. And it's true of everyone. So, and I guess this is the third thing. If nobody has privacy, then that's fine. If it were like just me who was being singled out as not being able to have private money, that would be bad. But we're all in the same boat. And so that's fine. Yeah, I think for the generation that I talk to mostly, which is 18 to 22-year-olds, the attitude is everything that I do could potentially be online at any time. And within the next 10 to 15 years, all of the politicians that we're electing will have all of these videos of them doing all sorts of stupid stuff. And it's not going to count against anyone because it's going to count against everyone. And I think that's the attitude more generally, is everyone's buying what I'm buying, everyone's doing what I'm doing. So there's safety in numbers, and it's true of everyone. So you're almost looked at as weird, and you have something to hide if you actually want stuff to be private. Why do you care so much about privacy? Are you doing things even worse than what we're all doing?
May I play the technocratic role here? Okay. Backed by some Keynesian and Schumpeterian thoughts. I think that my question actually has already been made by that guy, that's our PhD student, Marcello. And he is very technocratic, okay? But But he's a good guy, a good guy.
I'll write that down.
We have learned from Keynes two very important insights. First, that contemporary economy is a monetary economy of production. By that, Keynes meant that money is not neutral. Money makes the difference in economy in a lot of ways that actually have been forgotten by the typical Keynesianism that was appropriated by the mainstream economics. The so-called post-Keynesians have emphasized this crucial role that money plays in contemporary economy. The second side is that as money is in this economy credit, it allows the private investment without previous saving. So that's the magic of the system. You can make investment and jobs and everything else grow without saving, just creating money, fiat money. And that's why also fiat money is also known as credit money, as in the important book of a post-Keynesian economist, Robert Gutmann. And from Schumpeter's side, money is an institution, is a kind of a social accounting system. So it is important not only as a means of payment, but as a whole system of social accounting. And the credit that is created by this system is important for innovation. You cannot have innovation in society without credit. I would not be fair if I switched our debate from philosophical to a political economy debate, and I'm not suggesting this. But coming back to your point, in your brilliant book that I have read with great enthusiasm, it's a really brilliant book. But what my impression that I would like to hear you a bit more about something that I think I have not seen in the book, which is credit. But not as a matter of technical issue or a political economic issue, as a philosophical issue. If the assumption that credit is important for innovation in society, innovation in a broad sense, innovation, creativity, something that brings us far from mediocrity, something that can turn normal, regular men and women greater in their lives. What would be the role played by Bitcoin in this philosophical mission, this normative mission, to make regular common lives bigger, greater in this great system of economy and this so-called knowledge economy?
Ooh, great question. So I guess I'm thinking that credit is, so I definitely agree on the importance of credit for innovation. If you could have the most brilliant idea that's going to add the most to the world and not have the means yourself to bring it about. So you need someone else to extend you credit. And if Bitcoin did away with that kind of system, then we would lose a lot of the best ideas and a lot of the value that would have been brought into the world otherwise. So Bitcoin needs to, if we get to a point where Bitcoin is the only money, it needs to somehow still allow for innovation. So I'm not 100% confident in the answer I'm about to give you, but I'll be interested in hearing your thoughts. I guess my thought is that right now, the quality of an idea in terms of getting credit is secondary to the wealth of the person asking for it. So people who are wealthy who can put up assets in order to get credit are much less risky than people who have no assets but have a brilliant idea. And you get credit because you already have money. So more money tends to flow to the people who already have money, whether or not they themselves have ever done anything. Perhaps they inherited it or found it. Just having money is enough to get you more money and in terms of credit. So that's one thought, that maybe Bitcoin would make it more important that you have a good idea than that you already have a lot of Bitcoin. And then the second thought is that what was the second thought? I had two thoughts. Oh, that we are not, the money still has to come from somewhere that is created when extending credit to people. And it comes from the future, basically. We bring forward the money. We expect idea X will earn or will create $1 billion of value. So we'll create $500 million of value now out of nothing to then bring that idea into the world, which will then add to the value of the world or the GDP or something as much or more than the money that we've created. So it's I think of credit as a way of like bringing forward from the future the ability to do the innovation rather than having to save up for it and then building it in 50 years. We build it now and we have it 50 years earlier and we've paid for it with money that didn't exist before and it will pay us back in the future. I don't know as much economics. So this is just my sort of toy way of thinking of it. In which case, at least in the US, we've seen that the money that we bring forward from the future just keeps adding higher and higher and higher. And some people think that's not a problem. We need to keep doing it because look at the great strides in every area we've made since we started doing this. Tech and farming and just everything has been made better because people could start doing things without having to save up for them. But the money is the negative is still around. We haven't paid it off by these new technologies. And I think a lot of people are starting to get worried about what we do with that like huge amount of debt that we have. Do we ever pay it back? What happens if we don't? We just keep servicing it. Then eventually the servicing costs are catching up to and exceeding GDP, and what happens in that system. So the system is not possible with Bitcoin in that you can't create Bitcoin that hasn't been mined yet. So it would not allow that much borrowing from the future. You'd have to borrow in future Bitcoin, IOUs for Bitcoin, which is no longer Bitcoin. And then I don't know. Then it just gets really speculative. So
Can I jump in?
yeah,
Okay.
people who know more about economics. Yeah, please.
Bitcoin is a savings technology, and as a savings technology, it incentivizes low time preference, and people in a low time preference environment tend to have more savings, and the cost of capital tends to decrease. So the cost with lower interest rates, credit will be more abundant, or we'll try to set up a mechanism where capitalism is financed more by capital and equity than debt. So if I found a brilliant guy with no income and no capital, I can invest in him. We set up a company. I get half of the company, has other half of the company. He doesn't need to ask for a loan for me. With my Bitcoin savings, I become an entrepreneur with him, and I invest in his work, and I participate in the risk of this new investment. So the economy will flourish, but with a equal balance between risk and return. If I make a loan, I just want my money back and I don't participate. I have just the credit risk from him, but I'm not going to participate in this wholly in the as an equity owner in this new entrepreneur. So I think the conditions for credit would be more easier in a Bitcoin economy, because the cost of capital would be lower, and people will invest with their capital and savings more than credit. And as we don't have inflation anymore, goods will be new, cheaper, and better. So we will live in abundance because we don't have to take off loans. We don't have to. We will keep the fruits of our labor in a currency that doesn't inflation, and people and goods will be better and cheaper for everyone. So I think that's the balance. We don't have to rely more on credit as in the fiat system. We will rely on savings and capital and more knowledgeable application of this capital in new companies and ideas.
I think the credit discussion is always very interesting, as is the savings discussion. And what I always think about when I learn about commercial bank credit mechanisms, that seemed very odd to me, right? Because I always learned that I work in venture capital industry, right, where you have to go after investors who will lend you money that they own. So this is money coming out of assets, right, for you to look for investment opportunities, right, where you are going to put your own money, but the money of your investors too, and you will watch those investments like a hawk to make sure that you get the results that everybody is expecting, right? So because I as a venture capitalist, I have a lot of pressure from my investors and from my own savings accounts, so from my own savings that I put into those investments, right? I will look for the best opportunities available, right? And if that best opportunity comes from somebody like Guilherme was saying, without capital assets, without income, that happens. So Bitcoin doesn't do away with credit in general, right? It might compete, it might take some of the wind out of the commercial bank credit because it puts it into question, right? And commercial bank credit is pretty recent too. So it's still an experiment that we hope will work out, but many people think it's getting into the bubble of all bubbles. So it's not a question of either or, right? It's a question of maybe, again, rethinking what is going on there, and the idea of bringing possibility of savings back, like Guilherme was saying, is very powerful too. And we see this here in Brazil very clearly when we hear about news about the COE investments or people funneling money into betting like there is no tomorrow. And one of the ideas behind why that might be happening is that if you work today and you try to save and you are not and you don't have a good savings opportunity, that is a place where you can put your money and that money keeps at the buying power that you need. You don't want your money to grow. You just want to be able to use the money that you earn today the same way in maybe 10 years when you have enough to buy a house, right? But you don't have that. If you put it into poupança, right, into the savings account, you're going to be eaten by inflation. So what do people do? They look for other options, and other options bring risk with them, right? So you are putting common citizens, maybe a barber, maybe an engineer, maybe a teacher, who dedicate their lives to their professions. You're putting them in a situation where they have to educate themselves to have a second profession, which is to be a good investor in the financial market. And that's too much to ask of people. And if you have an asset that, let's see if Bitcoin gets to be that, right? Where you can just do what you do well, save up, and maybe then invest, and maybe then try a new idea, or maybe you will be in a position where you can take more risks. So you might take that Bitcoin or that asset that you saved and offer to other people as loan and ask a return on it, right? That's a different model, and maybe that's a better model. So it's again this discussion about having something that is 100 where you know exactly what the offer will be, right? So you know exactly what how much Bitcoin is going to be emitted at each point in time. You understand that if the demand grows for that might hold value much better than anything else with the same amount of risk, right? And this brings it puts everything into question and brings an option again to people to try something different.
I have two thoughts to sort of conclude this discussion. So one is when I talk to my 18 to 22-year-old students, they express exactly that view, that there is no way to save anymore. That the idea that I grew up with of putting your money in the bank and getting interest, and that would allow you to buy a house someday, they don't think that's going to work. And they don't think that even investing, which most of them don't have access to, but even investing and getting 5 to 10% returns per year is going to ever let them buy a house or be able to afford to have kids. The only way is to they don't do as much gambling, but become a social media influencer. So somehow make a viral video that gets millions of views and monetize it, or hit the right crypto token at the right time and make a 1000x and then exit. So they're constantly, when I talk about Bitcoin, asking me about what cryptos I think are going to pump next that they could get on early. And I tell them, no, I'm not thinking about gambling. I'm thinking about savings, but in the way that it used to be, where you could actually save. And then the second thought is also related to my students, which is that when I teach philosophy of money, one of the things we read is Keynes's Economic Possibilities for Our Grandchildren, where Keynes envisions that because of technological advances in everything from farming to refrigeration to television, we will be working 2 days a week, and then the rest of our time will be leisure, and mostly art and music and things that don't make us money but make us happy. And then I ask them, what happened? Why? Because in one sense, he's right. It has gotten so much easier to plant and harvest corn and to work with cows than it was when Keynes was writing. And milk isn't cheaper and corn isn't cheaper. So what's gone wrong? And one of the things that's gone wrong is inflation. Things have gotten more expensive. The other thing that's gone wrong is wealth inequality, that even though workers are creating much more value, they're not getting that value. I don't know if Bitcoin solves that problem. But maybe we could get to a future where everyone is sharing in the productivity gains of new technologies. Everything's getting cheaper and we can work less and be happier. That'd be really nice. Yeah.
We have time for one last question.
Okay. Good morning. Nice to meet you, and thank you for your presentation. I am a part of a study group here at the university focused on money laundering. One of the questions we have concerns the seizure of proceeds from criminal activities that have been converted into cryptocurrencies, such as Bitcoins. In such cases, how would it be possible to seize crypto assets if they are not held in the custody of an exchange, for example?
There are many instances of this happening. People who have stolen Bitcoin funds from exchanges or from individuals have oftentimes held on for a very long time and then been discovered later as new technologies come out that allow for blockchain analysis and things like that. There are also people who have stolen very small amounts that it's just not worth really going after. So I think the larger the amount is, the more financial incentive there is to use these blockchain technologies to try to find those people. And I mean, in one case, I don't remember the details, but there was a guy living in a rented apartment in Florida with like a USB stick buried under the floorboards that had Bitcoin private keys on it that he had stolen, and they found him. So it requires some mistakes. There are ways, I think, to do it where you never associate somehow the address with your identity. But it also gets really hard to evade forever and also spend it. So everyone in the entire world can see a theft on chain, and they can see every address that it goes to. And then suppose the criminals coin join a bunch of times. You still have probabilistic understandings of what address it might be at. So you follow every single address that's the output of the 10 rounds of coin joining. That's still in the thousands or 10,000s. At some point, some of those start getting spent, and you start looking more carefully at, and eventually Bitcoin spending has to get associated with the real world in some way. If you want a car or an apartment or a TV, and you can show up and see who's the person that did this and ask them where the Bitcoin came from, why were they involved in coin joining, etc. So I think for well-resourced governments that have incentives because the amount is large enough, it's still just really difficult to use Bitcoin to pull this kind of thing off. Much easier still to use US $100 bills, which is what most drug lords and arms dealers and everything use, because there's no ledger of those things. If you don't see the transaction happen, it's over and it's too late. Bitcoin, you can go back years later and still analyze the blockchain. So yeah, I'm definitely not an expert in this area, but from the experts that I have talked to and the reports that I've seen, Bitcoin is still just a really terrible way, even if you use all the privacy tools, to do at scale this kind of money laundering or criminal activity. Thanks.
Okay, so before we finish, I would like to thank people that helped to organize this event. This is a result of a collective effort. Thank you, Eduardo, from our technical team that hand out all this YouTube stuff. João Felipe, who is a PhD student researcher who has also organized this event. Laís she is an undergraduate student who has made the cartoon. Okay, she's an artist. Okay, and mainly Guilherme for making this intermediation with Professor Rattler. Thank you all. Thank you, people from YouTube, but a special thanks to Professor Rattler with this huge generosity and sharing 3 times of his time with us to share his ideas and his very provoking thoughts. I think that it's very important that besides all the practical and theoretical divergence, to emphasize that how relevant is that we are making this debate coming from a school of philosophy, in a law school, and everywhere in the world, that academia, people from anthropology, political science are discussing money. So money has, I think, once for all, taken from the monopoly of the economists. So that's great. So thank you so much, Professor Rattler. And it was really great talk, great meeting this morning. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah.
Gente, a SatisConf é o único evento focado 100% em Bitcoin, em grande parte por questões filosóficas e ideológicas, do ponto de vista que Bitcoin é diferente de todo o resto, porque é o que começou primeiro e trouxe uma carga ideológica interessante do Cypherpunk que se colocou aqui. 2 dias, sexta e sábado, na áudio, na Barra Funda. Tá? Os ingressos normalmente saem por volta de R$400. Tá? E tem o Lucas, que é o organizador, ele tem um interesse em trazer essa discussão para um número cada vez maior de pessoas, inclusive aqui na academia. Então, a gente tem discussões lá técnicas, né, de software, a gente tem discussões legais, tanto do ponto de vista de regulação, quanto do ponto de vista de contratos, sobre mineração, sobre empreender em Bitcoin, sobre arte com Bitcoin, sobre privacidade, sobre o envolvimento de pessoas na política. Então, acho que dá uma olhada, SatsConf, SATS, conf, de conferência.com.br, tem uma agenda extensa lá, e quem nunca usou Bitcoin vai ter a oportunidade de pagar o food truck com Bitcoin também vai ser divertido, tá? E tem show no final do dia,
né? Eu não sei como é que é um show de Bitcoiner, vou descobrir amanhã, tá? Mas deve ser no mínimo interessante. Tá bom? Serão todos bem-vindos.